Have you ever seen someone fall, and instead of being pulled to their feet, they were met with silence, stillness, and the quiet presence of someone simply lying beside them? Not to fix. Not to explain. Just to say with their body, "I'm not leaving you here." Tonight's story doesn't begin with a question like, "Are you okay?" It begins with a woman lowering herself to the floor, not to help a child stand, but to help him feel safe by not moving at all. If you believe that sometimes the kindest thing isn't standing tall, but meeting someone exactly where they've collapsed, like and subscribe, and stay with us until the end. Because this time, it's not the powerful father who teaches the lesson. It's the quiet waitress. And all she does is lie still. The crystal clink of fine silverware against porcelain echoed softly through the velvet-lit dining hall. A pianist played something light and unobtrusive near the corner of the five-star restaurant's VIP lounge. Patrons murmured over imported wines, their conversations carefully measured. The Reed family had been given the corner table, partly for privacy, mostly for prestige. Nicholas Reed, media tycoon and public figure, sat poised with his usual dignified presence. Everything about him, from his meticulously trimmed hair to the crisp charcoal suit tailored perfectly to his frame, radiated control. He did not tolerate chaos. He did not entertain disorder. His life, his image, was a well-oiled campaign of silence, power, and elegance. And this restaurant, like every place he frequented, bent gently to that image. Across from him sat Jude. 9 years old, pale and small for his age, the boy fidgeted with the hem of his beige sweater. His eyes rarely lifted from the linen tablecloth. He didn't speak. Not out of rudeness, but because words were too loud in his head. His world was a soundscape of hazards, clicking shoes, forks scraping plates, ice clinking in glasses. Jude had a name for all of them in his drawings, but never aloud. Loudness made his limbs stiffen. Sudden sounds twisted his chest into knots. When it got too much, he folded, silently, swiftly. Nicholas glanced over at his son, barely. He had told the staff ahead of time, no unnecessary noises. No strong scents. No attention. Just serve and disappear. Nina Flores noticed the boy first. She didn't mean to linger. Waitresses at the Orchid weren't supposed to observe beyond service, but the boy's hands had stopped moving. They'd frozen above the table like two small birds startled mid-flight. His breathing quickened. He turned his head slightly, toward the kitchen. That was when the sound shattered the calm. A glass slipped off the counter and hit the tile behind the bar with a piercing crack, harsh, sudden, metallic. The music didn't stop. The guests didn't gasp. But Jude did. He collapsed, not in a dramatic fashion, not with a scream or a shout, but like something inside him had simply shut off. His body crumpled down from the chair to the floor in one seamless motion. He curled tightly, knees tucked under his chest, hands pressed hard over both ears, his cheek against the polished marble. His eyes squeezed shut. His shoulders trembled as if trying to fold in on themselves. The table next to them paused. A man in a navy blazer lowered his fork. The manager stiffened. Nicholas stood. He didn't call for help. He didn't kneel. He just stood there, an imposing figure in a world that now watched him watching his son. His jaw clenched. His hand went halfway to his phone. Then stopped. The room seemed to hold its breath. Nina hadn't moved. She was holding a tray 2 tables down. But now, something in her shifted. She set the tray down. Walked slowly toward the boy, her steps careful, her face unreadable. In her years before this job, Nina had sat through hours of occupational therapy sessions. Not as a parent. Not as a professional. As a volunteer. Then as a foster mother. She knew what not to do. Don't crowd. Don't ask questions. Don't speak unless your voice is safety. She stopped a few feet from Jude. No one said a word. Then, with quiet deliberation, she lowered herself to the ground. Not in a crouch. Not in a rescue posture. She lay down flat, parallel to the boy, facing the same direction, her arms by her sides. Just far enough that he wouldn't feel invaded, just close enough that he wouldn't feel alone. She didn't touch him. She didn't tell him it was okay. She didn't tell him anything. Her face turned toward the floor. Her breathing matched his rhythm, shaky at first, then settling. She kept her eyes closed. From a distance, it looked like nothing. A woman lying on the floor. A child curled beside her. But something unspoken passed between them, a new axis, unspoken but understood. Nina wasn't pulling Jude out of his world. She was entering it. Guests whispered. A waiter half-lifted a menu to block the view. The manager's expression toggled between panic and disbelief. But Nicholas just stared. Nina Flores didn't move right away. For the briefest moment, she stood perfectly still in the center of the restaurant's low golden lighting, her hand resting gently on the back of a dining chair, her eyes trained on the small boy curled tightly against the floor. Around her, the world rustled with discomfort, soft clinks of silverware resuming, hushed whispers bleeding from table to table, the restaurant's polished facade struggling to hold. But Nina remained still. Observing. Breathing. She knew what not to do. It had been years since she left the world of therapy support behind, since she'd stood next to a child mid-panic and not flinched from their raw, unfiltered fear. Her body remembered things her mind no longer rehearsed. And this moment didn't require training. It required memory. She did not rush toward Jude. She did not kneel beside him like a nurse or a concerned aunt. She didn't utter the automatic, almost instinctual phrase, "Are you okay?" Because she understood, questions can be too sharp. Words, even soft ones, can rupture a child's fragile wall of defense. Especially now, when his world had become soundless panic. She took a slow breath in. And then, in front of the stunned hush of high-paying guests and rattled management, Nina bent her knees and lay down. Flat. Carefully. Deliberately. No urgency. No drama. No gasp of sympathy. She simply eased her body onto the cool floor, settling onto her side first, then turning until she was face down, her arms relaxed beside her, her palms facing the same direction as his. Her body aligned exactly with his curled frame, parallel and still. The distance between them was exact, 1 arm's length. Close enough to register, far enough to not overwhelm. She didn't touch him. She didn't speak. She didn't even look at him directly. Her eyes rested on the same polished tiles his cheek pressed against, and for a long moment, Nina breathed as quietly as she could, matching the silence that Jude's mind clung to for dear life. To an outsider, it might have looked strange. A grown woman lying face down on the floor beside a child in distress, her server's apron askew, hair loose near her cheek. She looked out of place. Unprofessional. Even absurd. But to Jude, her stillness changed something. No one had joined him on the floor before. People always tried to lift him, up from his crouch, out of his panic, into some imagined normal. They coaxed, pleaded, apologized. Some tried to touch him gently. Others pulled away, letting the moment pass like an accident they couldn't bear to acknowledge. But this woman didn't do any of that. She simply lay there. Her presence, quiet and unshaped by expectations, made room for him. Jude didn't move right away. His hands still clamped his ears. His eyes remained shut. But his breathing slowed, barely, but measurably. Somewhere behind them, Nicholas shifted. The sounds of fine dining resumed in pockets, awkwardly, then steadily. But the epicenter of the room had moved to the floor, where nothing loud was happening, and everything important was unfolding. Nina exhaled slowly through her nose, feeling the hardness of the marble beneath her ribs. It reminded her of the hospital floors where she used to wait while her son slept through radiation treatments. She remembered lying beside him when he was too weak to speak, placing her body next to his just to remind him he wasn't alone. No words. No fixing. Just presence. This wasn't a job moment. This was a human one. She didn't know this boy. Didn't know his name. Didn't need to. She just recognized the shape of his panic, the deep, curling kind that swallows sound and sense. And she knew the only bridge across it was to fold your body into its shape, and stay. She kept her eyes on the tile. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. If he needed an hour, she would stay an hour. If he needed the night, she'd figure it out. But in this second, Nina Flores didn't exist as a waitress, or a woman with a past, or a person risking her job. She existed only as stillness, a silent echo beside a child who had crumpled under the weight of sound. And in that stillness, something began to soften. Not loudly. Not visibly. But undeniably. Nicholas Reed had stood still in boardrooms, in front of flashbulbs, in high-stakes mergers where fortunes were balanced on his every nod. He had faced global scrutiny, national headlines, even death threats, without flinching. But in that moment, watching a woman lie face down on a restaurant floor beside his trembling son, Nicholas couldn't move. He had no script for this. The room, though still functioning in its routine, the clatter of service, the murmur of diners, the soft piano, had lost all relevance to him. There was only that space on the floor now, that quiet pocket of gravity into which his son had collapsed, and someone had followed. He stared. Nina didn't look up. She hadn't asked for permission. She hadn't looked to him for approval. She hadn't performed. She simply lay still, her body aligned gently with Jude's, not touching, not even speaking. It was as if she had become an anchor, offering nothing but presence. Nicholas felt something clench in his throat. He had spent the last 4 years buying solutions. High-end sensory tools. Private specialists. Customized therapeutic environments built inside his penthouse apartment. Nothing was too expensive, nothing off-limits. 5 of the country's top child neurologists had rotated through his payroll. They'd advised, diagnosed, prescribed. And yet, none of them had done what this woman just did. She lay down. That's all. She lay down. Nicholas's hands, usually composed and fluid with business gestures, now hovered uselessly near his sides. His right hand twitched once, then fell still. He had never felt this way before. Not even during the worst days of his divorce. Not even at the funeral of his younger brother. This wasn't grief. It wasn't rage. It was something he couldn't name, a raw, unbuffered seeing. A peeling away of every illusion he'd built around control. Across the tile, Jude moved. It was slight. If Nicholas had blinked, he might have missed it. The boy's hand released from his ear, one side only, and slowly, hesitantly, reached out toward the woman beside him. It was not a movement of desperation. It was exploratory, like a diver breaching from darkness into dim light, testing the surface. Jude's fingers brushed the fabric of Nina's sleeve. Just barely. A brush, not a grip. A whisper of contact. Nina didn't react like a professional marking progress. She didn't shift or glance up, didn't narrate the moment with a soothing tone. Instead, her body remained still, her eyes gently closed. But she nodded. Once. It was so slight, so delicate a motion that anyone not watching her with absolute intent would have missed it. But Nicholas didn't miss it. He saw it. That tiny nod. That quiet, wordless response to the boy's reaching hand. It shattered him. The world did not break apart in that moment, but something within him did. Not with drama. Not with noise. But with the unbearable weight of how simple it was. He had never knelt beside his son like that. He had never joined Jude in his place of fear, only tried to fix it from above, to conquer it, to sterilize it. He had thought his love came in the form of shields, of comforts built from wealth and privilege. But here on the cold restaurant floor, a woman had met his son in the one place Nicholas had feared to go, down. Fully, completely, down. Nicholas felt his breath grow shallow. His eyes burned. He didn't dare move. If he did, He might disrupt something fragile, something sacred forming in the quiet between that outstretched hand and that silent nod. So he stayed still, frozen in his tailored suit, in the middle of an upscale restaurant that had suddenly turned into a cathedral of silence. And for the first time in years, Nicholas Reed had no idea who he was supposed to be. Time passed slowly, quietly. 3 minutes is nothing in the life of a busy man. Nicholas Reed had sat through boardroom silences longer than that. He'd held his tongue for hours in negotiations, calculating outcomes and waiting for leverage. But this was not that kind of time. This was not strategic or measured. This was something altogether different, dense, sacred, almost unbearably still. The floor remained cool beneath Jude's cheek. His small fingers stayed curled near Nina's sleeve, not grasping, but not retreating either. His chest rose and fell, the rhythm no longer erratic, no longer stuttering with panic. Then something shifted. So subtle it was nearly invisible. Jude's hands moved away from his ears. One at a time. He uncurled, not with dramatic recovery, but in tiny increments. A soft roll of his shoulder. A loosening of his knees. Then, with surprising gentleness, he turned his head. His eyes blinked open. For a moment he just lay there, on his back now, his body stretched out on the marble tile like a child waking from an uneasy dream. His breathing had deepened. His lips, once tight and colorless, softened into something neutral. His brows weren't furrowed anymore. He was not smiling. He was not okay. But he was no longer trembling. Nina felt it. Without looking, without needing confirmation, she sensed the change in his posture, the letting go of whatever tension had been holding him hostage. She took one more breath, then slowly began to rise. She didn't rush. Her movements were deliberate, patient, and impossibly calm. She pushed herself up from the floor the way one might rise from prayer, slow, reverent. She never reached for the boy. Never gestured. Never asked anything from him. Once upright, she settled on her knees, folding her hands quietly in her lap, her eyes fixed not on Jude but on a spot on the floor just beyond him. Still present. Still available. But not pressing. Jude turned his head toward her. Their eyes met. For a single weightless second, the chaos of the room melted away. Then, with a hesitance that seemed both ancient and childlike, Jude placed his palms flat against the tile and pushed himself upright. He didn't look around. Didn't search for praise or permission. He just sat. Right beside her. His legs tucked under him, spine slightly curved forward, eyes still focused only on Nina, waiting perhaps to see if she would move again. She didn't. She just breathed. And that somehow told him he could too. Nicholas had not realized he'd been holding his breath until that moment. The sudden exhale burned in his chest. His knees wobbled. His vision blurred for half a beat. He had not expected this. Any of this. He had not expected the boy to move. He had not expected the woman to stay. He had not expected something so silent to undo him. But it did. Without thought, without hesitation, Nicholas stepped forward and dropped to his knees. The sound of them hitting the tile was soft, barely audible, but in his mind, it echoed like a stone into deep water. There was no calculation left. No image to preserve. He was no longer the man who entered the restaurant 15 minutes ago. There, kneeling beside his son, he didn't care who watched. He didn't care what the tabloids would say if they got hold of this moment. He only knew one thing. His son had returned from wherever he'd disappeared to. And someone he didn't know, had gone in after him and brought him back. Not with force. Not with rescue. But with stillness. And Nicholas had almost missed it. Nicholas knelt there for longer than he intended. The cold of the tile seeped into his knees, but he didn't rise. He didn't move. His suit jacket, once crisp and commanding, bunched awkwardly at his elbows. His breath came slow, uneven, and somewhere in his chest, something unfamiliar was stirring, a soreness that had nothing to do with posture. He glanced at Jude. The boy remained seated, quiet, alert. His gaze hadn't wandered far from the woman next to him. Not fearful, but watchful. As though some part of him was still trying to believe what had just happened. Nina hadn't moved since sitting up. Her body was still, folded gently in place, calm in a way that felt earned. Not stiff, not rehearsed, just quietly rooted, like someone who knew how to make stillness feel like shelter. Nicholas turned to her. His voice, when it came, was lower than usual. Not the authoritative tone he reserved for public addresses. Not the clipped efficiency he used in board meetings. This voice was raw, scratchy around the edges, hesitant in the middle. "I thought I'd done everything," he murmured. His words didn't fill the space. They fell into it. It wasn't a statement. It was a confession. He hadn't planned to speak. He hadn't even realized the thought until it came out. But once it did, it hung there between them, simple, honest, unfinished. Nina didn't look at him. Not directly. She blinked once. Then her gaze dropped to the floor again. Her response was as quiet as his, but sharper, more precise, like a scalpel cutting through fog. "You did everything," she said softly. "Except lie down with him." There was no blame in her voice. No anger. No accusation. Just truth. Laid bare. Nicholas's breath caught. He looked at the boy again. Jude was sitting still, his eyes now slowly drifting to his father's face. For a heartbeat, Nicholas saw something there, something like a question. Or maybe an invitation. It hit him harder than he expected. He lowered his head. Not in shame. Not quite. But in recognition. For the first time in years, Nicholas felt like a man who'd missed something. Something not technical, not logistical, but human. He had built Jude a world of quiet. Private schools, silent elevators, custom headphones, a fully soundproofed bedroom. He had tried to create stillness around him. But he had never joined him in it. He had never sat beside his son's fear, not really. He had never entered the place where Jude disappeared to when things got too loud. Until now. And he hadn't even done that. Not truly. He had followed. He had watched. She had done it. The waitress. The woman whose name he didn't even know yet. She had done what $100,000 of therapy hadn't. She had noticed. She had waited. She had made space. She had joined. And Jude had come back. Nicholas swallowed hard. He didn't say anything else. Didn't try to explain. Didn't try to defend himself. Because there was nothing left to say. He wasn't a CEO in that moment. Wasn't a billionaire. Wasn't a man accustomed to solving problems with influence or resources. He was just a father. A father who had never knelt this close to his son, not like this. Not without an agenda. Not without a goal. Just close. Jude shifted slightly. His hand, resting now on the floor, edged toward Nicholas. Not a reach, not a plea. Just proximity. Nicholas didn't move to grab it. He let it be. The silence between them was full, but not heavy. It felt, for the first time, like something whole. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. No email. No courier service with a sleek corporate logo. Just a plain white envelope, the kind you'd find at a corner store, with Nina's name written in a handwriting that was surprisingly careful, slanted slightly, as if the writer had slowed down more than he was used to. She didn't open it right away. It sat on the counter of her small kitchen for the better part of an hour, next to an unopened bag of coffee beans and a stack of unpaid electric bills. Part of her assumed it was from the restaurant. A complaint, maybe. Or worse, an official reprimand for unprofessional conduct. Lying on the floor in the middle of a high-end dining room wasn't exactly covered in her training. But when she finally unfolded the paper inside, she recognized the tone before she finished the first sentence. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't business. It wasn't even prideful. It was human. The note read, "I'm not sure if I got it right that day. I probably didn't. I've spent a lifetime doing things with precision, meetings, media, managing things that break. But I don't know how to sit in something I can't fix. I may not know how to lie down properly. But if I sit in the wrong place again, could you teach me?" There was no signature. But none was needed. She recognized the weight behind the humility. Nicholas Reed was not a man who asked for help. He was not a man who let go of control, certainly not in writing. And this letter, it wasn't about a job, or a partnership, or even gratitude. It was a request. Not for her to work for him, but to walk beside him. Nina set the letter down, her fingers lingering on the paper. She remembered his face from that night, not the version she'd seen in magazines, not the smoothed-out businessman mask he wore on interviews, but the raw one. The one she'd seen when he'd knelt without hesitation beside his son. No calculation. Just need. And she remembered Jude. The moment his hand had crept toward her. The way he'd sat up on his own. The space between them full of trust, not instruction. That trust had been built, not commanded. And Nicholas, he wasn't asking to command anymore. Later that afternoon, she called. Just once. No voicemail. No explanation. When he picked up, she didn't say hello. She didn't thank him for the letter. She simply said, "As long as you don't stand up before he does." There was silence on the line. But it wasn't awkward. It was solid. Full. He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't press for terms. He understood. It was an agreement, unspoken but binding. This would not be mentorship. It would be learning, together. Nicholas knew boardrooms. He knew headlines. He knew how to command attention, how to shape perception. But he did not know how to wait on the floor. He did not know how to listen to silence without trying to fill it. And Nina? She wasn't offering him therapy. Or a program. Or a shortcut. She was offering to stay beside him long enough for him to learn what it meant to stay beside his son. That was all. And somehow, it was enough. The building wasn't large. It didn't need to be. It sat on a quiet street, tucked between an aging library and a bakery that always smelled of warm cinnamon. No glass tower, no bold signage, just a simple wood-carved plaque near the door that read, "Ground Level." Inside, the space was soft. Not in design, necessarily. The floors were a smooth, neutral wood. The walls held no fluorescent lights, no buzzing appliances, no echoing hallways. There were no chairs. No tables. No whiteboards or rows of desks. Just wide, open floor space covered in thick, padded mats. Beanbags lined the edges like quiet sentinels. The ceilings were low. The windows high enough to filter sunlight without distraction. It felt more like a breathing room than a treatment center. And that was by design. Nicholas had insisted on funding the entire project, but the philosophy was Nina's. He had asked her once, months ago, why no chairs? She'd looked at him plainly and said, "Because chairs assume the child will rise." So they removed them. Everything was grounded. The mission of Ground Level wasn't to raise children out of panic, but to meet them where they were, in the overwhelm, in the stillness, in the deep echoing hum of their own bodies. Today was the opening day. There had been no ribbon-cutting ceremony. No press. No cameras. Just a quiet walkthrough with parents, staff, and a few invited children, many of whom were already shrinking from the gentle hum of unfamiliar voices. Nicholas stood behind the privacy glass near the observation area, hands folded in front of him. He wore no tie. His sleeves were rolled. The nerves in his stomach felt sharper than anything he'd experienced on Wall Street. Jude was across the room, sitting near a curved alcove filled with soft lighting and warm pillows. He looked still. Not calm, exactly, but at peace with the space around him. Then Nicholas saw him freeze. A child, smaller than Jude, maybe 6, had crawled beneath one of the curved tables, knees pressed to his chest, shoulders tight, trembling visibly. His face was turned toward the wall. He wasn't making a sound, but the shake in his body pulsed outward like a silent alarm. For a second, Nicholas's instinct flared. He moved to step into the room, then stopped. Because Jude was already moving. No words. No glances toward adults for permission. He simply slid off his cushion, dropped gently to his knees, and crawled beneath the table. He didn't touch the other boy. He didn't speak. He just lay down, carefully, slowly, beside him. Face down. Still. Parallel. Exactly 1 arm's length away. Nicholas felt his throat close. He stood frozen, watching the scene unfold through the glass, his reflection a pale overlay across the image of his son lying motionless in solidarity. There was no training in that. No prompting. Just memory. Then, without thinking, Nicholas slipped off his blazer. He folded it carefully, precisely, almost reverently, and set it on the bench behind him. Then he opened the side door, stepped quietly into the room, and lowered himself down to the mat just beyond the table. He didn't try to enter their space. He didn't announce himself. He just lay down. Not beside them, but nearby. A quiet presence. A shadow of support. And in that moment, Nicholas Reed was not a founder, not a financier, not a public figure. He was just another body willing to get low enough to be seen by those who couldn't rise yet. Ground level wasn't about healing. Not directly. It was about waiting. About presence. About reminding children, and the adults learning beside them, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay. Sometimes, the kindest thing is to stay. As we grow older, many of us become fixers. We solve problems, hold people together, offer advice, and carry weight that others cannot. It becomes instinctual, to step in, to speak up, to make things right. But sometimes, especially with those who are hurting, the most healing thing we can offer is not action. It's presence. The story of Nicholas, Jude, and Nina reminds us of a truth that's easy to forget. Not all pain needs fixing. Some pain simply needs company. Jude wasn't asking for someone to lift him off the floor. He wasn't asking to be comforted with words or surrounded by solutions. What he needed was what so many of us once needed too, someone to come down to our level and stay. Not to carry us, not to pull us, but to be with us in the quiet. As older adults, we may think we've lost the power to make an impact. Our hands aren't as quick, our roles may have shifted, our voices may not carry as far. But presence is not bound by age. In fact, the older we get, the more valuable our presence becomes. We've lived through heartbreaks. We've known silence, grief, and change. And that experience allows us to recognize when someone doesn't need to be fixed, they just need not to be alone. A grandchild struggling with anxiety. A friend quietly grieving. A neighbor going through a private battle. They may not know how to ask for help. But they'll remember who sat beside them and said nothing, just stayed. We don't always need to understand someone's pain to stand with them in it. Or rather, to sit. To kneel. To lie down. The story ends with a father not standing tall, but lowering himself beside his son. That image stays. Because it reminds us, dignity isn't always about posture. Sometimes, the greatest dignity we offer is when we choose to make ourselves small, so someone else doesn't feel so alone in their fear. So today, if you feel helpless in the face of someone's struggle, consider this. Maybe you don't need to lift them. Maybe you just need to get low. And stay. If you've ever believed that helping someone meant pulling them back to their feet, remember. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is lie down. Just so they know. They're not the last one left at the bottom. Like and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. And tell us, when was the last time someone lay down beside you? Did they say anything? Or, Did they stay quietly like Nina?